All right, hey guys, welcome to Tarot Themes in Video Games. I think I finally got the mic figured out, so that's great. Thank you so much for being here with me today in Prime MAGFest hours instead of at Bunfest or partying. I really appreciate it. This is Tarot Themes in Video Games. I'll just go ahead and jump in. I want to talk about a little bit about the background of tarot and then kind of transition into how that kind of shows up in everyone's favorite tarot-themed video games. So I'll go ahead and start with a little bit of history, bore you guys to sleep with a history lesson. I know you came here for exciting entertainment, and now I'm going to be like, hey guys, let's talk about Europe in 1375. So traditional playing cards were first seen in Europe in 1375. I'm starting way at the beginning. Like, we have gone all the way back in time. They definitely didn't know what a video game was, but they definitely knew what card games were. And so they existed for about 60 to 75 years before we have the first mention of triumph cards in a letter by the Duke of Milan. And the letter was basically like, I'm super rich and I bought a lot of cool stuff. Let me tell you about these triumph cards. They're beautiful. I got them custom illustrated. There's like gold foiling. And it's really interesting because like you have to kind of assume that maybe they existed for a while before the Duke of Milan bought some and then bragged about it to his friends in a letter. But, you know, so they think the triumph cards are based on the beautifully illustrated Mamluk. I'm going to butcher a lot of pronunciations today. I apologize. So the Mamluk cards of Turkey, which were like really beautifully illustrated playing cards. So then our first recorded reference to tarot cards specifically is from 1440. Tarot cards were initially used for playing trick-taking games. So if you've ever played whist or bridge, basically everybody has a hand and they play and they see who wins the hand, and then they keep doing that until they're out of cards. And so you had your suits and then you had your tarot trump cards, like your major arcana trump cards. There are multiple murals from the 1400s showing people of all ages, classes, and genders playing cards. So this was something that was really common across all stratas of Italian culture. So then by the 1500s, the Italian aristocracy was enjoying a game called Tarocchi Appropriati. And so this is where like the tarot cards had gotten so popular and like so entrenched in the culture that they would have parties. And everybody would show up and they would pull a tarot card and then would compose poetry on the spot based on which tarot card they pulled. So like you'd go to the party and you really wanted it to impress that girl that you were like really into, and you'd be like, oh, I pulled the moon, you're radiant in the night like the moon. And they would do all this like free-form rap battles based on like what tarot card they pulled. And this was like, they had whole parties for this. Like everybody would just get together. I mean, I guess they didn't have video games or the internet. So what else were you going to do besides compose tarot card poetry, I guess? And so in France, I can't believe I didn't put a year on this one. So then in France, there was a writer and he was like, I am going to write a comprehensive 9-volume history of Europe. And he sat down and he said, I don't care what actually happened. What's more important is what I feel in my heart. And so he just started writing things. Like he was just like, you know what? I think tarot is very Egyptian. And so he wrote this entire like chapter of the book where he was like, tarot is based on a holy book written by Egyptian priests, and it was brought to Europe by the traveling people from Africa. And all the medieval people were like, do you guys remember encyclopedias from like the 90s where like everybody bought like a set of encyclopedias and it was on your bookshelf and like your friends came over and you're like, look at my $1,200 set of encyclopedias. I could look anything up. It was kind of the same thing. Like the Europeans went crazy for this thing. They're like, look at my 9-volume history book set. But like it was just a bunch of made up stuff. Like he was just like, and so like we have this like common trope in like the media of like traveling people who will like go from place to place and like the creepy fortune tellers. But like all of that is based on this book that this guy wrote because he had a feeling that tarot cards were Egyptian. Like he I guess he never went to one of the parties in Italy where they were like doing the free-form rap battles based on which card you pulled, because like there's so much history about how these things are Italian. And he was like, I've got this, guys, don't worry about it. And then his 9-volume history set was super popular. And he was kind of the first person who was like, yeah, these are, holy Egyptian magical cards. And everybody's like, oh, yeah. And then you have this guy, Jean-Baptiste Alliette. And he started writing. He got the 9-volume set, and he loved it. And he was like, I'm going to write too. And so he started writing under a pen name. I'm not sure how to pronounce this one, Italia. But if you squint real close, you can see that he just used his last name backwards. Super original. Super original. And so he started writing, and he was like, yes, I read in the book that these are a fortune-telling tool, and let me tell you how to do it. So about 2 years after the history book, he puts out a guide for reading tarot, and then in 1791 he publishes a tarot deck specifically for the purposes of divination. So this is the first time we see tarot in the context of like fortune telling or divination, as opposed to like a whole card game situation. And on that note, I love tarot cards. I love the iconography. Obviously, I'm into it because I wouldn't be here doing a panel on it if I didn't feel passionately about this. I will do like spreads and stuff like that, but I don't really believe in like the whole fortune telling aspect of it. I'm totally cool if you guys do, if that's something you go for. I want to hold space for like everybody's like ideas and concepts and beliefs, and I just want you to know like that's where I'm coming from with this. Especially with all this history here, that's like, surprise, it's Italian. So then it kind of like lost popularity for a while until we hit the Victorian age. And the Victorians were obsessed with death and the occult and all of that sort of like mysterious, like you see all of like the seances. And when you think of like a seance, you think of like, Victorian England. And that sort of thing, and like everybody gathering around. So again, in the Victorian times, there wasn't really that much to do. So you would get together with your friends and hold a seance, or you would get together and do like a tarot reading. So then you have this character that's Mademoiselle Lenormand, and she was kind of a famous or like infamous figure in like 18th century France, and she was very into reading fortunes and reading the cards for people. And it is rumored that she read tarot for Empress Josephine and Tsar Alexander, as well as like other famous figures. And so like she would have these like gatherings and these parties that were like enormously publicized, and all the papers would write about her parties and how she was fortune telling and how she had read the fortune of, Empress Josephine. And she was arrested like multiple times for like shady fortune. Like at the time it wasn't like everyone was obsessed with the occult, but then like if you had like a fortune telling party, they'd be like, oh boy, that's witchcraft and we have to arrest you. So she was like hauled off a bunch of times, but like I don't know how much of it was like her being like, hey, papers, I'm having another party, you should write about it, and how much people were actually like incensed about this. But she was instrumental to popularizing tarot again in the 1800s, because like all of the papers were writing about her parties and how she was arrested again and what is she gonna do next. And, it's kind of like how much of it, I don't think Lenormand was even her real name. And like, it's kind of hard to tell how much of it was like her trying to like make a name for herself by being like, oh yes, of course I read the cards for Empress Josephine. And how much, like, did she actually do that? I mean, I don't know. I don't know if you get arrested at like tarot parties in your local like row house, but also read the cards for the Empress. Leave that one up to you guys. And so then we kind of get into the Rider-Waite deck. So, whoops, sorry about that one. So this kind of, the cards had kind of started back in Italy, And while they were fairly consistent, they weren't really standardized in their iconography or what they included. And you can even see, like, if you look at like traditional playing cards, sometimes the suits vary, sometimes the number of cards in the suits vary. They can kind of be all over the place. And so in 1909, we have the first real, like, popular published deck. And it's the Rider-Waite deck. And this is going to be the one that I feel like a lot of people are familiar with, and the one that, like, a lot of people have seen and will recognize. So William Rider and A.E. Waite commissioned an artist who was Pamela Coleman Smith to illustrate a tarot deck. Waite was a mystic scholar, and he was studying the history of tarot, which at that point, what 1785, he writes this book about how how it's a fortune-telling device. And then in 1909, we're like, 130 some years later, he's studying the history of tarot, and he's like, oh, this is enchanting. I need my own deck. So he commissions this artist, and they sit down and they do this whole deck and really kind of set the iconography and the major arcana and like the format that we're familiar with in stone, and kind of like standardized all of it. And so about 100 years after the tarot as a fortune-telling tool initially becomes popular, you see this huge spike in popularity again, because he gets this deck commissioned, he prints a whole bunch, and he starts selling them. There may have been a World's Fair involved. And so then you find in 1977, Kaplan gets the rights to this, and they publish a book called Tarot Cards for Fun and Fortune-Telling. And you see another resurgence in the late 70s of a lot of interest in this iconography, and you see a lot of renewed interest, especially in like themes from like, you know, the early 1900s. Like you see a lot of like heavy like Art Nouveau theories. So you see almost like 100 years later, everything's coming back into fashion, and it's very cyclical. Which I just think is fascinating, because, you know, you have these tarot parties where everybody's like, you know, doing their poetry based on the card they pull, and then it kind of falls out of fashion, and then you have people getting together in Victorian England to have these like fortune-telling seance parties, and then it kind of falls out, and then you have, again, like in the 70s, everybody's getting back into it, and the iconography and all. I just think it's fascinating, like how things just cycle back in and out of popularity. Okay, so the format of the deck. There are 78 cards in a deck. There are major and minor arcana, 22 major cards. They go from 0 to 21, 0 being the Fool. And then you have 56 minor cards, which are going to be very much like, oh, did it? I don't think I touched anything. Okay. All right, cool, thank you. I appreciate it. All right. Give me a shout if that happens again. I cannot see the screen at all. Right, so you've got your major cards, and then you're going to have the 56 minor cards, which are going to look really familiar if you've ever seen a deck of cards. Hopefully most of you have seen a deck of cards. I'm being a little presumptuous with that one. But so you're going to have the minors, which are, I feel like, less commonly seen. I have the 6 of Cups up from a deck I have that's stunning. So I feel like the minors really get a lot of attention in like media, where you're like, you see the movies and, you know, the characters like, oh, pick a card, and then they get death, and they're like, oh my God, am I gonna die? And then there's a whole Stephen King movie about it, and okay. So I feel like the major cards get a lot of attention, but there are 56 other cards that are just like the 6 of Cups and like the 7 of Wands. And then you get your face cards, which, again, you're familiar with if you've ever seen a deck of cards. You've got the King and the Queen and then the Ace, and then you have the Page. So those are your 4. Is that your 4? Knights, yes, thank you. Sorry, I took a nap right before I came to this panel, and now I'm like, I don't know what year it is. I don't know if I'm Katsucon or MAGFest. I don't know what's going on anymore. But again, like this might vary depending on the deck. Like some artists are like, I'm not really into. A lot of times they flip like strength and I think temperance, and for the most part, Rider-Waite really standardized the formats of the deck and like the order we see the decks in. But every once in a while, you'll see deviations from that, and I don't think it's wrong. I mean, I have my opinions. I don't think it's wrong, but I really like just like the heavy history of like Rider-Waite and like the hundreds of years of like this is how we've done it. I'm always a little miffed when they like cut majors out or they like swap majors around, but you don't see it too much unless you're looking at like Oracle decks, which are a whole different thing. So you have the major arcana, and these are your trump cards. They have numbers but no suits, and they're going to have names. So this is where you're going to see like 0, the Fool, or 1, the Magician, or you're going to see the Hanged Man, or the World, the Moon, the Star, the Lovers, the Devil. There's 21 of them. I could go for a while. And they're going to tend to be like your trump cards, and these are the ones that I feel like popular, like you see a lot in popular media and games and stuff like that. And then under that, you have your minor arcana. These are typically going to be divided into 4 suits that are going to be named wands or staffs or staves. Pentacles, which you might also see as coins, because I feel like pentacles sometimes has like a connotation. But I feel like if somebody's going to take issue with like pentacles being one of the suits, they probably are also going to have issues with you reading tarot cards as like and dealing with tarot cards already. So like I understand like swapping pentacles to coins for like optics, but you're already there with an evil fortune telling deck. So swords and then cups. And then, yes, you have your 4 face cards, Page, Knight, Queen, and King, which is different from, and then there's aces as well. So that's one additional face card on top of what you see in a normal card deck. And then you have your 10 numbered cards, like a regular deck. So, you'll have not your 1, oh my God. You'll have your 3 of Swords. You'll have your 6 of Pentacles. You'll have your 8 of Cups. And that'll go all the way through. And then some of the minors have like nicknames too, where you have like the majors have their names, like the Magician and like the Empress and stuff like that. But like sometimes the minors get reputations, like the 4 of Pentacles. The image is often, it's an old man and he's like clutching onto his pentacles, and the minors have like their ascribed meanings as well, and they call him the miser because he's holding onto his pentacles so tight. Or like the 10 of Cups is generally seen as like a really positive card. And some people will say it's the wish card because you're going to get everything you wish for if the 10 of Cups comes up in a reading. It's very much like, oh, this is a good happy ending sort of deal. And so you see that a little bit. Just going to time check here. So, all these cards have ascribed meanings. How do you figure out what the meanings of the cards are? So a lot of times when you buy a tarot, I wish I had brought my decks. I didn't even think about it. A lot of times when you buy a tarot card deck, it will come with a little booklet that will be like, hey, here's what all the cards mean and how to read different meanings and how to do different like readings and that sort of deal. And like there are tons of websites out there where you can just Google like tarot card meanings and that'll pop up. Generally, when you do a reading, what the advice is supposed to, what they tell you is whatever source you use to interpret the cards, whether that be the book that came with your cards or a website you find that you particularly like, that is going to give you the meaning that was meant for this reading. It's not like, oh, I did this reading, I used a website to figure out what the meaning of the card was, but the website was wrong, I should have used the book. No. Pretty much like, and so when you're doing a reading, that's how it is. But a lot of times the cards themselves, when we start from Rider-Waite, they really start to have really set meanings and connotations and like kind of feelings ascribed to them. But there are also like other ways to kind of look at it. You have these 22 majors, and then you have your minors as well. And so one of the ways you can kind of look at it is the energy of the majors will flow down to the minors. So you have number 1 is the magician in the major arcana. And then when you look, he's very much about finding your mystical power and coming into your powers and being in tune with nature and that sort of thing. And so the first card in the minors is the ace. And so you see the aces tend to be very much about like finding your creative energy or finding your voice when you want to stand up for yourself or finding your passion. So you have the magician who is very much about finding your own power and having that energy. And then you have the aces which kind of pull from that. And then you kind of see that as well sometimes in the other cards where like the major and the minor will kind of be mirrored meanings that, you know, are kind of smaller than the major meanings. Where do you find resources? Well, you can go to Barnes & Noble and get tarot card reading for dummies. I'm pretty sure that one's out there. You can look online. Like I said, most of the books come with like a little booklet that'll be like, hey, how do you read cards? Here are the meanings. And I don't know that there's really any wrong answer. And like I said, they tend to be pretty standardized now since Rider-Waite. So it's... you're going to kind of be in the ballpark no matter like what resource you're doing. So like if you're you're looking at your favorite character and you're like, well, a lot of people online will associate this character with the magician. When you look up like the meaning of the magician, it's all going to have pretty much the same flavor. And that's because Rider-Waite really kind of standardized things. And then there are reversals. So sometimes you'll do a reading and a card will come up backwards or upside down. And some people don't read them or don't want to deal with them because it's an extra layer of complication. But there are various ways to read the card upside down. You can read it as the energy being blocked. So you have the magician, who's very much a card about finding your energy and finding your power and being in tune with that. If it's upside down, you can say like, oh, the energy is blocked. So like, you know, you're having trouble finding your power. Or there's another one where the one website I was looking at when I first started reading was like, oh, imagine what happens if you turn this card upside down, and that's how you read it. So take like the 10 of Swords. The ladies, is it the 10? I'm going to screw this up. The lady's in bed, and there are a bunch of swords on the wall behind her. And so if you take the card and you flip it upside down, what happens? She falls out of bed. All the swords fall off the wall. And I'm like, really? Is this how we're reading the reversals? Like, what does that mean? Like, that seems worse than crying in your bed with a bunch of swords behind you. Like, is this really how I should be reading it? So, again, it's like the same thing. However you read it, I don't know that there are really any wrong ways to do it. But it can be a really good tool. Some of the games will talk about like, oh, the card is reversed, that means something. And so this is what they're talking about when they talk about reversals. They're sometimes talking about like, oh, the opposite meaning, and sometimes they're just talking about like, oh, the meaning's been distorted or it's different. So if you have something like a negative card and it's upside down or reversed, that usually tends to be the negative card even worse. But then if you have like a cheerful card upside down, it tends to be a bad meaning too. So I feel like it gives you extra information and extra like layers of complexity, but it can really complicate a whole situation and a whole understanding of a situation. And then you have Oracle decks. And I'm hitting those because I feel like you see a lot more of that in video games nowadays that want to use like the tarot themes, kind of lean more in like the Oracle deck direction. I really love the Rider-Waite iconography, and I really love that all of my cards have ascribed meanings, and that I can pick up any deck, and the magician is going to mean the same thing, and have the same sort of image from deck to deck. I'm not a huge fan of Oracle decks because they tend to be a little bit more freeform. So instead of having like your 22 major arcana and your minor suits, sometimes it's just like 30 cards, and they're all pictures of cats. And the one cat is adventure, and the one cat is like freedom, and the one cat is like swimming, and you're like, okay, well, let me figure out like what these mean. And so like I feel like when you have the Rider-Waite like tarot iconography, you can really depend more on like these consistent meanings, whereas like an oracle deck is like the art can be really beautiful, but the meanings can often be a little more off base. And so like sometimes you have the similar themes like strength, and you're like, okay, well that's a tarot card and now it's in my oracle deck. And then and sometimes they don't match up at all. Like I said, like my friend has the cats one, and like the one cat is like adventure and the one cat is like freedom, but none of those are really like tarot cards. But then you'll also see like strength, like that's pretty like straightforward. And you'll see a lot of oracle decks come up in video games. I think the kind of thing is like, it can be really daunting when you have this giant deck with all of your majors and all of your minors, and you have to figure out 78 different meanings. And like, if you're using the deck as a stand-in, so I have Cult of the Lamb up here. Have you heard of it? Have you played it? They use like tarot cards as power pickups. And so what they actually have is closer to an oracle deck, because there are some cards that are the same. Like it has the Lovers. Trying to think of the other ones that carry over. Yeah, we're gonna do our best. And so you have a lot that carry over, but then like it can be really hard to kind of translate one-to-one. Like what kind of in-game ability is the Emperor going to give you? You know, like what kind of in-game bonus are you going to get from the Wheel of Fortune? So it can be easier a lot of times to cut down this massive 78 card deck to maybe like a more manageable 30 cards and give them names that are maybe more indicative of what kind of power pickups they're going to give you and what kind of things they're going to do for you. So I think the one I have up here is like Shield of Faith or something like that, and it gives you a bonus. I might be thinking of a different card. I looked at so many. Oh my gosh. So you'll see like a lot of times the games will feature not a tarot deck, but like more of a smaller, more concise set of cards. And they might still call it like, oh, these are tarot card pickups, where not being one-to-one. That's fine. They're having a good time. More power to them. They found a theme and they're running with it. And I think a lot of times it really works. Like with Cult of the Lamb, it's got that very big like cult vibe and that dark energy and that kind of like mystery. So to like throw something that like a tarot card deck in that has a lot of that like loaded meaning and a lot of that like cultural significance, I think can really like help explain to you like a theme or like really hit those thematic notes. And then sometimes you see it called other stuff. There's like, you know, the Deck of Many Things, or I'm running, it is not a video game. I am running Curse of Strahd as a tabletop game, and they have the Turok deck, and like the card names are all different, but you know what they were going for. So you kind of get like the similar themes, and without having to go for like a whole deck. So I feel like we've been seeing it more in games recently, where you get, again, they go back to like the whole fortune-telling trope. Sorry, let me. It's so dry in this hotel. So I feel like a lot of games will fall back on like the fortune-telling trope, even though it's kind of like pulled from, you know, not actual tarot history, but like the pop culture idea of what tarot is, or, you know, going back to the book where the guy was like, I'm going to write about my feelings. Tarot is for fortune telling. And then a lot of people are like, oh yes, that's all I really know about it. So you'll see a lot of times you kind of fall back on the fortune telling trope. as like a foreshadowing device. Because it can be really effective to like have a character walk in and pull a card and it's death. And you're like, okay, so now I have to spend the rest of the game avoiding dying. And if you're like me, that's not going to happen. But it can really set these story notes, and it can really like foreshadow or like lay out like a roadmap for where the game is going. Even if it's kind of a tired trope at this point. Like maybe there are better, more elegant ways to do that foreshadowing than just having somebody sit down and be like, oh, first the lovers and then death and then the wheel of fortune and then lovers again. Like, I see what you're trying to tell me. But also because all of this meaning is so loaded into the Rider-Waite tarot cards, like you have all this iconography that's been really entrenched. It can be really effective to assign cards to characters as like a shorthand for explaining their story or their character traits. So like, for example, you have a card like the Emperor, who tends to represent very authoritarian ideals and really sticking to your traditions and really like holding your morals and being like a very strict sort of person. So if you see a character who has the Emperor as an associated card, you can off the bat kind of make some inferences that this is a character who is going to be very set in their ways, very entrenched in their ways, very interested in maintaining the status quo, maybe very militaristic, maybe really about like power and strength as a show of violence. And so those are the sort of things like, you know, I can say this character is associated with the Emperor, and now I have backloaded all of that meaning into there, as opposed to like, okay, I've got another character and we've associated this character with the Empress, which tends to be a card that's very much more about like the feminine energy. And I'm sorry I have to use these terms. This is just how it kind of goes. But you see it associated very much with like traditional femininity, that nurturing nature, that caring nature. And, you know, there are negative and positive traits associated with all the majors. But so I feel like you can go ahead and like make some assumptions if you see the characters kind of tied to certain cards, which I think can be kind of a less loaded way to introduce like tarot cards into games. And it can be like a less kind of tired trope. Because you do have these characters who are associated with these cards, and then you can think like, how do they represent these cards? How do they not represent these cards? Like, in what ways can I see this coming? And then maybe your expectations are foiled. Or maybe the game designer decided that the character represented the Emperor because he was an old dude and not necessarily because he embodied any of the aspects of the Emperor. So this is where I'm going to try to kind of transition into tarot cards in various games. So my list is not exhaustive. There are a ton of games out there that use tarot themes. I kind of tried to hit some more recent ones that I thought did a really nice job of kind of covering it, and just some ones that were like bigger hits or more popular games that like you see this in, and it might come up. But I'm going to go ahead and ask you guys, do you know any games with tarot cards in them? Can you give me some that you've heard of? I'm going to start here. Mm-hmm. Binding of Isaac, I've got that one. Up front? Which one? Vampire Survivors. I have not heard of that one, so, okay, fascinating. Okay, can I move over here in the back? Also a game I have never heard of. With Sayonara Wild Hearts? Did I get that right? Okay. Up front? Yes, Cyberpunk. I'm gonna hit that one a little in depth because I think they did a really beautiful job. And yeah, we'll get there. Okay, I'll do in the middle. Persona. Yeah, Persona is a very big one. Persona has been entrenched in like tarot iconography from the start, which I think is super cool because like it's really interesting to like build this whole franchise on like this heavy iconography. I think that's really fun. So all right, we got in the black, yeah. Signalis, another game I have never heard of. So thank you for expanding my knowledge here. I really appreciate this because, like I said, my list is not exhaustive. I have hit like a couple, but like you guys are like bringing up things I have never heard of before. So that's really cool. I really like that. All the way in the back. Yeah, I have heard a lot about, when I was talking to my friends about this, they're like, you have to cover Ogre Battle, you have to cover Ogre Battle. And I'm like, okay, I don't know what that is. I did not cover it. I've let them down. So, like, again, my list is not exhaustive. I love this. This is great. On the side? Shadow Heart's Covenant. Okay. All right. This is great because like there's a ton here that I mentioned that you guys have not mentioned. So that's giving me like a lot of excitement because I can be like, surprise. All right, things to consider for the next time I run this panel for sure.
Who's Lila? And all the endings are represented with a tarot card that is relevant to the story.
Oh, interesting. That's really fun. You said, who is Lila? Okay, all right. Again, fantastic. I've never heard of this one. Maybe I'm just showing how like non-comprehensive my own personal knowledge of video games is. We do in the back?
Phasmophobia has a deck of cards that you use for, has like different effects.
Phasmophobia. Okay.
So it goes under that.
Right. And then all the way in the back. I see you. Mm-hmm. Red Dead 2, really? I had no idea. Where does it come up? Online. Okay. All right. Interesting. You got. Okay. I played like 25 minutes of that, and then I was wiped off the face of the map in like the third fight, and then I was like, you know what? Maybe this isn't for me, and I have to admit, I never went back to it. Yeah, and it's really fun that they can like not like go full into it, but just like be a little more subtle with like their representation. I think that's really cool. And I think it's a really fun exercise. Like a lot of people will do it and sit down online and they'll be like, I was doing it just because I love tarot cards and I play a lot of League of Legends. As you can see, they recently started doing Arcana skins. And they flat out said, like, the Arcana skins do not map one-to-one tarot cards. Don't try to map them one-to-one tarot cards. So, of course, what did I do? I sat down and I made sure. I was like, okay, this character is this tarot card, and this character is this tarot card. So, like, I sat down and mapped out, like, all, like, 173 League character. I don't know how many. How many are there now? I don't know. I didn't have anything going on. Like, clearly it was a slow weekend. Like, this was a couple years back. I was, it was fun. I had like an Excel sheet. I roped my friends into it. Like, we were all sitting there. Like, we got into like almost fist fights over like skin lines not matching up with like, it was like a whole thing. All right, I've got a couple more hands and then I'll go ahead and move on.
Martha's dead.
Which one?
Martha is dead.
Martha is dead. Okay. Here?
Not a video game, but a board game called Arkham Horror, the card game.
Yeah.
You use tarot cards as modifiers.
Yeah, there are like a lot of like tabletop games and board games now that use like modified like, and I'll hit just a little bit of that. And then was there one more hand in the middle? Oh yeah, give me last one. Run it. Inscription. Okay, I've heard of that. I haven't played it. So, okay, that's fine. You know what? I'll take it. So Leia, let me go ahead and hit up some of these. So I'm going to go ahead and go with Cyberpunk 2077. This is a fairly recent release, and I thought they did like a really nice job kind of like tying in the Arcana and like really all of the cards have these beautiful illustrations that are like very cyberpunk style and very like, I've got one here, the King of Wands. They all kind of look like this. They're really abstract and like really like technically well done and beautiful, in my opinion. I do love the Rider-Waite iconography, but I also love when they take it and they do something totally different. That can also be fun. A bunch of the endings are named. I think there's something like 6 endings, and they are all named for different major arcana. And there's a little fortune-telling scene where the character lays out the cards and then tells you like how the game ended. And then the 22 major arcana are in the game as pickups, and they all have little journal entries that explain the meaning of the cards. And like, I just want to give whoever did Cyberpunk like 10 out of 10, because you have this stunning art. When you pick up the cards, they give you journal entries explaining the meaning of the card and maybe how it ties in. And then all the endings have like the little like reading laid out in them. And I think that's just like fascinating. And then they did the DLC, which had the additional 4 cards, which were just the kings of the minor suits, like King of Wands, King of Swords. And then they went back, and Cyberpunk 2077 is based on a tabletop role-playing game. So they went back to Cyberpunk Red, which is the tabletop role-playing game, and they added in optional rules for pulling tarot cards for like buffs. I have actually not played Cyberpunk. It's not my flavor of tabletop game. Also, we're here to talk about video games, so that's fine. But I just thought that was really interesting that they were like, it's such a heavy theme in 2077, let's go and put it into the physical role-playing book. So I really like that. Binding of Isaac. I absolutely adore all of the art for the cards. They did a really good job of putting all of the major arcana in and making them really recognizable. But I feel like they don't really tie into the story a lot. Like, they give you like a power up, and you know, that's fine. You swap them out, you've got one at a time. And I feel like it ends up being really similar to the Cult of the Lamb. We've already hit the Cult of the Lamb's cards. But instead of like kind of making up its own, it just gives you the major arcana and assigns different like power ups and different like aspects and stuff like that to it. So I think that was like a lot of fun. And it kind of makes you think, like, if you were going to sit down and assign different power ups to different arcanas, like, what would you pick? I don't know. It's kind of a fun thought experiment. Maybe you don't need a Excel sheet like I had for the League of Legends characters, but I think it's a really neat idea. And then, did you have? Did they really? That's fascinating. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I didn't know that. Did they like put it in as like, instead of like a plus 10% bonus, it's like a minus 10% bonus, or? Okay, that's really interesting. Yeah, I had no idea that they'd done that. So that's a lot of fun. And then we've got Marvel's Midnight Suns. They have the major arcana as collectibles, and they did all of this art for them, and they picked like different Marvel characters to represent different things. So the magician was Doctor Doom, which I was wild about. And then, of course, the moon was Moon Knight, and I was like, and what we're doing here. And then the Fool was Deadpool, which I thought was really interesting. That's the sort of thing where, like, I feel like it's hard to tell. It's hard to tell sometimes, like, how into the iconography and the backgrounds the game creators are. Because, like, the Fool is usually the first card. It's, instead of being 1, tarot starts at 0. The major arcana start at 0. So the Fool is 0. And the Fool traditionally represents either like the person who's asking for the reading, the querent, and it's very much a card about starting fresh on your path. So it's called the Fool, but it's not like you're dumb, you're an idiot, like what are you doing? It more represents like the unseasoned young man and his dog going out to explore the world, and they're very new and fresh with this, and they're ready to see all the world has and go on their journey. So, like, I think it was really interesting that they made that choice, and it makes me wonder, like, how into it are they? And then I think they made, like, some choices here that maybe it makes you think. It makes you stop and think. Like, they went with Doctor Doom for the magician? Like, I've got some thoughts about that, but But the one thing they did that I wasn't wild about is they started at 1 instead of 0. Maybe they thought it was going to be too confusing if they made the Fool 0. So they were like, the Fool's 1 now. So you see the Magician is traditionally 1 in a tarot set, but here we have it, it's number 2. And then if you collect them all, you get a little outfit. Isn't that lovely? Not a big game tie-in, but I think it's fun that they sat down and they were like, we're into tarot cards. Like, if Dr. Doom was a card, which one would he be? Like, I don't know. Yeah, I would not be surprised if like they were like, oh yeah, Moon Knight, and then they kind of like, yeah, I didn't read a whole lot about like development choices here, but it makes you wonder, like, you know, it was a recent game, it included tarot. It's fascinating how you have games like Cyberpunk, which really embed, or, you know, we'll get there, Persona, that really embed these concepts and the iconography into the game. And then you have other games where they're like, you know what would be fun? Let's make all the characters Major Arcana cards. And then if you find them all, you get a little outfit, woo! And like, there's a whole difference between like entrenching the iconography in a game and then like just kind of putting it in there as a cute little throwaway. And one of the really fun things that they do sometimes is like they'll put these cards in the game, and then they'll go and print a physical deck of cards for them. So you can have, I think there is a physical deck of tarot cards for Cyberpunk 2077. And I don't know if the developer did it or if it was like a Kickstarter project by a fan, but it's really cool that sometimes they'll like actually sit down to flesh out a whole 78 card deck, or a lot of times they'll do just the Major Arcana, and it ends up being more of like an art piece that you have on your desk as like a nice thing to look at than really a functional tarot deck. But it can be a really cool tie-in if you were like really into a game, and if you're really into tarot, I guess. I don't own any, but this one totally caught me off guard because I had no idea until I found the art for like the full Street Fighter V Major Arcana, and I'm like, who did this? And then the answer was the Street Fighter V devs, and I was like, what? Never would have guessed. If you had been like, hey, name some common representations of tarot cards in video games, not only would the Street Fighter series not be on my list, I would probably tell you that you have made some sort of mistake and are confused if you told me it was on that list. But there's a character, Rose, and she has a Soul Fortune move, and she will throw one of 4 cards, sorry. They're all named for the Major Arcana, so you've got Magician, Chariot, Death, and Tower, and when she throws the cards, a little card will appear either behind her or the enemy she hit with it. And the cards feature the other characters from the game. And like, I do not play any fighting games. I will just put myself out there right now. I have no hand-eye coordination. They tried to teach me how to play Smash once, and I could not do a down smash. So I've never played any Street Fighter. But I just loved that somebody sat down and was like, Magician? That's Zangief. Yeah. Yeah, I know. I've made that call. Like, beautiful. Beautiful. Whoever did that, fantastic. That's great. That's great. And like, I don't feel like if you were going to ask me like what kind of like abilities or power-ups you got from these cards, I'd be like the Magician. Maybe you get like, you know, I don't know, extra magic, or like you know, the Chariot. Oh, you've got move speed. No, like it just does a bunch of random stuff, but it's great. It's great. I love that. And like, they only use 4 cards in there, but if you look in the game files, apparently they did the art for all of the Major Arcana. Like who commissioned that? Who was doing that? Was it? Okay. Twitter. Oh, interesting. Yeah, I had like I said, I don't do any fighting games, so I had no idea when this popped up on like the lists of like, I was just like, you know, there were some I knew I wanted to cover, and then I'm like, you know, I'm interested. What other games have like that I've never heard of? So when this popped up on the list, I was blindsided. Like I would never have guessed. But delightful. Okay, yes, we have to address the elephant in the video game. Persona. I have not really played any Persona. I watched like half of a walkthrough of Persona 5 because our friend was really into it. But I didn't ever really get into any of the earlier games. But Persona is just so steeped and entrenched on the tarot card themes across all of the games. I think it was 4 renamed a couple of the cards, but for the most part, it keeps the major arcana. A couple of the games even feature the minor arcana, and basically every playable character has a tarot card assigned to them, and all of the characters are very much like representative of the cards are very representative of their journey or like their character traits or like their themes in the story. And I just think it's so interesting that a lot of these games are like, our game has tarot cards as like a collectible side quest pickup. And Persona is like, no, I'm going all in. Like this entire game is based on the concept of mashing tarot cards together. Let's go. And so I really love that. But I thought this was fascinating. But Temperance and Tower have never been represented as playable characters in any Persona game. And that I think that's fascinating. Apparently there was a side character that was not like an NPC. That was the Tower, I think. But I just think it's fascinating. Like, I feel like these are such easy concepts to like hit in a character theme. And it's just fascinating that they've never gone in and really hit those two cards. Would Temperance be exciting as a character? I could really see though, like if you're playing a game and like you're the main character, I could really see it being really easy to have a character that is like, hey, listen, you're running around and you're doing all of this, maybe slow down a little. It'd be so easy to make Temperance a character that was like very much like a guide who was like, maybe slow down, like maybe take it easy, like maybe don't rush into everything, maybe like, so I feel like just a character that was like, let's give it a little caution, or like even a character that like removed status effects would be real, like, I don't know. But so like, yeah, I feel like it'd be so easy to have like a character that like represented the Tower, like that would obviously be a character that was just a total mess. But a lot of people are like, death is the worst card in the deck. But death is very much about like renewal. And it's not like I'm dying. It's more of like the death of the old you and the rebirth of the new you. And it's very much a card about cyclical change. Like it's the sort of thing you would expect to come up. Like if you're moving from one phase of your life, like maybe you're leaving college and going into the workforce, that's very much a death card. The Tower is just like bad things are gonna happen, a calamity. So I feel like it would be so easy to also have a character that was just a total mess. And then you could be like, oh yeah, that's the Tower character. So I think it's really interesting that these are the ones that have never been represented, because I feel like there are so many more abstract concepts in the major arcana that would be harder to kind of wrap your head around. Like, how do you represent the Chariot as a character, or Wheel of Fortune as a character? Like, or like the Hanged Man. Like, there's just so many concepts that are so much more abstract than Temperance. And then here's my, none of my, I was having trouble with the internet, and it looks like none of my changes saved on this last slide. That's fine. So Dragonage Inquisition is another big one that comes up, where all the characters are kind of described as a tarot card. And what I really love about Dragonage Inquisition is that as your characters change and grow, their attributed card will change as well. And I think that's really fun, because like, as interesting as it is to like have characters that are always going to be, you know, sorry about that. As much as I think it's like really interesting to have characters that are always going to be like strength, or always going to be like the Emperor and are these unchanging monoliths, I think it's really cool to have the character go through growth, and then to also show that through the cards that are associated with them changing. So like the one character starts off as like the Hermit. And then like if you get into, was it the Hermit? Oh. Yeah, I think it was the Hermit. And then as you romance him, his card changes. And then if you like go all the way to like the bad ending with him, his card changes again. And I think it's really interesting to kind of like represent that change through like changing cards. And I feel like as much as like the definitions of the cards are very entrenched in the card, it is very much the nature of reading spreads and having cards that represent you to change. Like, it's one of those things where, like, if you sit down and you lay out a tarot spread and you're asking, like, what does my future, relationship look like? And you lay your first spread out and it says one thing, and then you sit down and you do the exact same spread 10 minutes later and it's totally different. Those things like don't contradict each other because, the future is malleable. Like, maybe it's just telling you options. I tend to use it more as like a meditation tool. Like, you see what you want to see in the cards. So it can be really good to just sit down and read the cards and be like, oh, didn't realize I was stressed about that. Okay, that makes sense. So I think it's really in the nature of like reading tarot cards and spreads and like people to be like changeable. So I love that, as much as I love that Persona is like, this character is the Emperor. I really love that Dragonage Inquisition is like, this character is very much the Hermit. You make an impact on his life and now he's a different card represents him. So I think that's super fun and cool. And that is my last slide. So thank you for coming. I appreciate it. This is something that I really love and enjoy. I was reading a little book. It was a bathroom reader, and it was talking about tarot cards. I was on a road trip, and they got me one to keep me quiet in the back of the car when I was like 13. And it was like talking about reading tea leaves and reading tarot cards. And I'm like, what is this? And I got really into it. And so this is something I've been like really passionate and interested in for like 20 years now. So thank you for letting me share it with you guys. And hopefully I've given you at least some tools to think about how these cards might represent characters you're interested in and characters you love. So if you've got any thoughts, questions, comments, I'd love to hear them. So let me know. You start.
I think it's funny, one of the last lines you mentioned about how the tarot cards are valuable more in Dragonage. I was just kind of reminded in one of the earlier Persona games where you can go through a social link or interaction with a character that's a certain arcana. If, say, the path of choices you make while talking to this person or giving them information, you can actually have their arcana be reversed, and instead of getting the positive effects of the arcana, you would actually get the reverse.
Oh, that's really interesting. Do you know which one that was?
Persona 3 Fest.
Okay, so Persona 3. Okay.
They remade it and recorded it, they got rid of that effect.
Really? Okay, interesting.
You can actually lose points or lose kind of status that you get from working towards it.
That's fun. That's a really fun way to like include reversals, and that really like makes me feel like they did their research and they knew what they were doing. All right. Yeah. I'll bounce to the middle here.
About, on one of your earlier slides, you talked about someone who published a book about how to use tarot, really early on. You mentioned them gaining the rights to tarot. Was that meaning that tarot was under just some form of copyright or something?
Well, specifically the Rider-Waite deck. The Rider and Waite commissioned the artist to draw the cards, and then the copyright on that specific art for that specific deck was copyrighted. And so they got the rights to reprint specifically the Rider-Waite deck. Anybody can sit down and draw their own tarot card deck because, again, it's been out there since like the 1400s. So it's not like Italian copyright lawyers aren't going to come after you if you decide to draw your own tarot deck. But specifically the Rider-Waite illustrations were what were purchased and then reprinted. Yeah.
I appreciate that you focus on the artistic side of it, the visual representation, because with the Rider-Waite deck and the Hermetic Order of Golden Dawn, which, their whole spiel of trying to find some relevant meaning in divination, was very much so commissioned to be intentional with like their meaning and the pictorial arrangement. And what those represent. So delving into that difference of dichotomy against like, oh, this is an oracle deck and this is one that actually has those elements that we can read from, is something I wish people would acknowledge more. So I appreciate hearing that. And so yeah, it's weird copyright hell, but like I'm glad that people can still take that and be like, be intentional with art and like.
Yeah. So my first deck was actually like a mini travel deck that was these stunning watercolor illustrations that were very much reimaginings of like just more detailed, like are more like differently are styled representations of the Rider-Waite cards. So like the magician was still like a guy with all of like the icons and stuff like that. And so like I think it's really cool when they take the same iconography, and a lot of times the iconography on the card very much echoes like what's happening on the card. So like, what is it? There's, I think it's the 8 of Wands or Staves, which is like a guy and he's like fighting a bunch of other guys. And it's very much a card about like strife and very much a card about like picking your battles and like being embroiled in a conflict. And like right there on the card, you have like a guy fighting like 3 other guys and they're all whacking each other with sticks. And it's just very much like I can look at that and I can be like, oh, that guy's fighting. And then every time you see that iconography like repeated, you can kind of pick up on those meanings, and it's really easy to like if you have these visual cues to remember that guys fighting with sticks is a conflict card. Or there's another one where the guy's in a boat and he's like really thinking about his life and he's got his staff next to him, and that's always very much a card about like travel or like that sort of thing. Some of them tend to be like much more abstract, so like this one is like the Queen of Pentacles up here. And it's very much like a very abstract deck. And they can be visually stunning, but not necessarily give you any like cues to what the meaning behind it is. And it's really just a matter of like preference. It's my pet peeve. I think Oracle decks are kind of silly. And I think it's frustrating that like, I apologize if you love Oracle decks, but it's frustrating to me that like I've spent all this time trying to figure out what meanings are associated with which Rider-Waite cards. And then you get these Oracle decks and they're like, forget everything you know. This is the cat of adventure. And I'm like, oh my God. But that's just me. I don't want to learn new things. Go ahead. There are a couple. There are definitely a couple cards that you get them and you're like, oh no. But nothing is set in stone, and everything is a chance for like even if everything has been torn down to the ground, like that's still an opportunity to start fresh. So it might be devastating or there might be heartbreak, but like. You can always move on. It's actually really interesting because I love the iconography of the tower. And like when I do like my set readings, like I don't know that I really believe like I'm telling the future. Like I said, for me, it's more a meditation tool, but like every once in a while, like it's spooky because like it keeps spitting out the same card over and over and over again. And you're like, okay, well, I know this is random chance, but like, what does it mean? So I almost never get swords in my readings. So I'm just inclined to forget that swords are there. Which I guess is a nice thing for me. But yeah, so I tend to see the tower a lot more than I see the 3 of swords. So I don't know that. That's a good point, though. Like there are negative cards, but it's all a matter of interpretation. So do we have any other thoughts? Any other questions? Any other? Yeah, we can. Mm-hmm.
Do you find that when you read with a different deck and the artwork is changed, you grab symbolism from the new artwork, or just take the whole deck?
I worked really hard to kind of like learn the meanings based like on the cards. So I tend to find that like when I do it, like I really want to be able to like do my readings without sitting down with like a 170-page book on like how to interpret each individual card. And so there are ones that I'm like really familiar with. You'll see me talk again and again about like the Magician, and you see me talk about like the Emperor, and you see me like call out specifically like the 4 of Pentacles. But like like some things just never come up in my readings, so I'm like less familiar with it. So for me, I tend to rely more on the meanings that I've learned based on like traditional Rider-Waite. But I think it's always open to interpretation. I think the art can really change like your experience. I personally only own 2 decks, and I don't really like to read with other people's decks. It's like a thing. Even though I don't know that I strictly believe in like the fortune telling abilities of the deck, I try to respect like the traditions because it's fun, and it like really gives you like kind of like this whole ritual and relationship. And because I use it more as like a meditation tool, those rituals really help me like feel at peace and like calm when I'm sitting down to like think about something that's a problem in my life, and using the cards as a tool to explore my own thoughts and feelings that maybe weren't obvious to me. So because I only have 2 decks, I feel like the art changing my interpretations of the cards doesn't come up too often. I wish I thought to bring mine. I have one's a mini deck, and it's really lovely, and the other one I have is this one. It was an artist on DeviantArt that does these stunning watercolor images, and I was following her like in high school in like 2005, and I watched her do like all 78 images, and I purposely put this one on here because it is one of my decks. And I finally bit the bullet, and this was my second deck, and so now I have a mini deck and a full-size deck. And like I have a friend who collects, I have multiple friends who collect decks because they love the art, and they have no qualms about getting like an Oracle deck because they just like the art in the Oracle deck, or getting a tarot deck because they love the art. But for me, I feel like they're much more like, I want them to be like a more personal experience. So it is an art object for sure. It's stunning. But also like I have this whole relationship, like I've been watching her paint these things since 2005. Of course I need the deck. So it's kind of fun. It's kind of fun to make what you want to out of it, really. Again.
What do you think about the tarot use of JoJo?
In what?
JoJo's Bizarre Adventure?
Oh, boy, yeah. Yes, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure sure is a thing that has tarot cards in it. I tried to get into it, and I really couldn't. It was just too over the top and ridiculous for me. When I watch anime, I watch psychological horror. So like JoJo fighting a vampire is not really. I watched a couple episodes in the middle too. I watched like the first season and like a couple episodes in the middle, and I just could not do it. So I don't really have that much of an opinion on it. I apologize. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so we're out of time, so I'll go ahead and wrap it up, though nothing else is in this room. So if you want to hang out and chat with me, feel free.